We are mostly aware that Cairo is one of the power cities of the modern world. It is a tourist hotspot and thrives from the lure of the surrounding wonders. But Cairo is also a very special city in the fact that it stands alone as the city that may hold more secrets to our ancient past than anywhere else in the world. Think about this. Cairo is surrounded with the most ancient structures on this earth from a time we are obsessed with because we are pretty much still in the dark as to what it was. Items of historical interest that have been found in the modern city continue to defy logical understanding. The city is built upon a ruined ancient site that was swallowed by the desert over tens of thousands of years. So is it any wonder that the great lecturer and author Robert Bauval is quoted as saying that, "In the dead of night and all night long, when the city is quiet enough, Cairo is filled with the sound of the residents digging in their basements for ancient artifacts." It's a strong statement and a shocking one to think that in Cairo City, all day and night, every day of the year, there is constant digging and looting of these ancient things taking place. The result of this is a billion-dollar global trade that has been going on for, well, God knows how long. If these things are worth billions yearly, then over the past 100 years alone, we are looking at a figure in value that is hard to even consider an existence of. If we were to tell you that the black trade has generated a number in excess of quadrillions of dollars, you are hard pushed to even imagine such money even exists. This, of course, has been the fuel of the super city. A constant disregard for history has seen Cairo flourish. It was once the colonial powers who benefited from these riches, and it makes you wonder that if they are still finding things daily, even after thousands of years of theft, how big was the ancient empire, and are we grossly misunderstanding the sheer size of the ancient civilization whom produced these things on a biblical scale? Wait till you hear this. The city is a contrast of ancient and new, east and west. The pyramids of Giza near Memphis stand at the southwestern edge of the metropolis, and an obelisk in the northeast marks the site of Heliopolis, where Plato once studied and is credited to have learned of Atlantis at this location. Between these extremes are other architectural monuments, dating from Roman, Arab, and Turkish times. The city of Cairo has been a constant place of interest as long as our history will stretch, and you would be forgiven for suggesting that this is the center of the world. The Great Pyramid is located at the exact intersection of the longest line of latitude and the longest line of longitude. Coincidence? We think not. Some 5,000 years ago, Memphis, today lying mainly in ruins, was a thriving metropolis. According to a commonly accepted tradition, Memphis was founded about 2925 BC by King Menes, who supposedly united the two prehistoric kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt, giving us the dynastic period of Egypt. This unification was important. The original name of the city was the White Walls, and the term may have referred originally to the king's palace, which would have been built of whitewashed brick. In addition to crediting King Menes with the unification of Egypt by war and administrative measures, a tradition appearing in the Turin Papyrus and the history of Herodotus credits him with diverting the course of the Nile in Lower Egypt and founding Memphis, the capital of ancient Egypt during the Old Kingdom on the reclaimed land. The emergence of the Great Kingdom clearly left its mark on history, but we need to remember that they were not the first. There was a break between civilizations in the region, possibly as much as thousands of years between the cataclysmic event roughly 12,500 years ago and the re-emergence 5,000 years ago. The bit in the middle was possibly a dormant period where the great monuments and pylons were just sitting there awaiting the survivors to rediscover them. And that is what the dynastic period of Egypt was: a rediscovery, a reinterpretation, and a rewriting of history. This is becoming more clear to us every day. Incredibly, it is as if we are only now beginning to awaken to these truths. The possibility doesn't lie in the question of the dynastic Egyptian. It is in the watering down to fit history into these times. The force-fitting of the timeline, the squeezing of every single piece of pottery and brick into a period where it is known that not only did they not have the tools and equipment available for such undertakings, they also lacked the envisioning of such projects, and even crude replications are embarrassingly far short of the workmanship of the great monuments. That alone is enough to question everything. It's unknown if we will ever know what took place on this earth before the ancient cataclysm, but it's clear they were advanced, almost beyond belief. We have even had NASA employees suggesting to us on this channel that they are a master machinist who works as a contractor for JPL Laboratories, suggesting to us that they have created pieces, instruments, and components that went into the first power tools used on the ISS during spacewalks, and also the gears that are inside of the joints of the arm of the Curiosity rover. And they are adamant that some of the pieces shown in our previous video from Brien Foerster, visits of the Cairo Museum, have completely baffled them, and they would only be able to replicate them with the original materials using multiple stage machines operations. They go on to say that the failure rate with the CNC machines while using diamond tip tools would be very high. We use mainly carbide tools to machine the majority of our metals, from titanium to heat-treated stainless steels that have Rockwell hardness, averaging from the 30s all the way up to the area of 48. This is some hard metal. This is mind-boggling when I think of what the official explanation is for when and who created these amazing objects. The looting, of course, is rife. You can go online and pluck stories left, right, and center of the scale this is on. In fact, it's off the charts and vastly unknown. Nearly 30 ancient Egyptian artifacts that narrowly survived the Arab Spring uprising in Cairo in 2011 have gone on display in Cairo. The exhibition, entitled Destruction and Restoration, includes 11 items that have been stolen from the Egyptian Museum. 18 other artifacts have also been restored after being damaged or destroyed by looters. They include 3 priceless statues from the era of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. One golden statue depicts him spearfishing from a boat on the Nile, while other treasures are from the era of Pharaoh Akhenaten. 54 artifacts went missing from the museum when looters broke in during the first days of the January 11 uprising that toppled presidential Hassani Mubarak. A mummy that had its head torn off during the looting has now been fixed, with experts using methods from the time to reattach it. 25 of the pieces have since been recovered, though several are still unaccounted for. Mohammed Ibrahim, State Minister for Antiquities, has insisted that none of the missing artifacts have been taken out of Egypt and that authorities were still searching for them, but these are only a few known items that were documented. There are countless undocumented treasures all over the world, and still 90% of these things are still to be discovered, hence the constant digging of the basements and desert at night. It is sad, guys, but there is still so much left to discover, and we can't change the past. There is so much to consider about Cairo, the obvious being the Giza Plateau and connecting Saqqara necropolis. There were possibly canals that linked the entire area that have since been swallowed by the sands of time. We will link our video on that at the end of the video after Brien Foerster's tour of the Cairo Museum, of which we are sure you will like to stay tuned. And please check out Brien's Hidden Incan Tours website below. We hope you have enjoyed this second part as requested. You can let us know below what you are thinking, guys. And as always, thank you for watching.
Greetings, this is Brien Foerster of Hidden Inca Tours, and this is the interior of the Great Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Now, Jason here, who was on our recent tour in March 2018, is inspecting this giant granite unfinished box. And what's amazing about this is we'll see obvious signs of lost ancient high technology, like that saw mark you see in the center of the video. Now, I think on purpose, they pushed this unfinished box against a wall so that you wouldn't inspect these amazing saw marks. But what we see are two circular saws working, one on top, one on the bottom, obviously powered by some kind of machine, and rapidly cutting through this granite, which is 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale, with diamond being 10. You can see that the top saw started to veer off course, cutting into the main part of the block, and then it wound up snapping half of the lid off. The lid was going to be from the same piece of stone, from the bottom, to be placed on the top. And now, right next to it, we see another granite box, and this is a different type of saw working, almost like a bandsaw. Again, clearly working at high speed, and in terms of modern technology, that would require diamonds, a diamond-encrusted blade. Such a thing did not exist during dynastic times, so we have to consider the idea that these saw marks are from a much older civilization that had lost ancient high technology. Here again, the multiple saw marks. And then somewhat nearby is this basalt box. And what you can tell from here, again, is that the box itself had to have been made using advanced technology, and this object was found by the dynastic Egyptians, and then they simply carved these shallow vertical lines into the surface, probably with relatively crude tools, possibly Bronze Age, maybe even iron, but the lightness of the lines means that they were done more recently than the shaping of the box itself. So for the moment, that's it for the first floor of the museum, and now we're going upstairs to visit the second floor. And what we first encounter are a number of wooden sarcophagi. But as we go to explore these sarcophagi, we encounter one of the most enigmatic of all objects in the museum. Aside from this 10-foot long wooden sarcophagus, of which there are at least two, were there people actually that tall who fit in these sarcophagi? But what we encounter is the amazing so-called schist disc, and we'll go more into detail with that after we observe another one or two of the massive sarcophagi made out of wood from the dynastic period. Here are normal size ones, between 5 feet and 6 feet tall. And then this huge one, which is 10 to 12 feet tall. Is it simply a symbolic sarcophagus? So back to the so-called schist disc. It's called a schist disc because the archaeologists believe that it was made out of a stone called schist, but our geologist, Susan Moore, who is an expert, of course, on stone, believes that it's actually metamorphosed clay of some kind. That would mean that it would be very, very dense, and also would be able to resonate. So this object, whatever it was, clearly rotated, but the strange thing is that the fins, 3 of them that you see there, don't angle. So it isn't apparent whether it was pulling or pushing air or water. Maybe it was simply made to set up some kind of vibration. So when we look at the profile here, unfortunately it was found broken and very badly repaired, But again, you can see it's a very complex piece of work. And it was found along in a cache with 30,000 to 40,000 turned very hard stone bowls and plates that could only have been made using lathes of some kind. And even the labels on these objects state that they're likely from the pre-dynastic or archaic period. So here's an approach again to the so-called schist disk. They put it here so that the sun shines on it, I think on purpose, so that it's very difficult to properly photograph. The fact that it's even still on display is quite amazing because it's very much an anomalous object which does not fit into either the time frame or the technology of the dynastic Egyptians. And here are some of the turned objects. These, again, are likely quite hard stone, and you can see they're perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, so they would have had to have been made on lathes. Since the archaeologists are stating that these are from the archaic period, that means that they were constructed prior to the invention of the potter's wheel. And a lathe is a far more complex machine than a potter's wheel. These could have been partially made on a lathe and then partially hand done because of the strange spouts that project off. But this fascinating object that has 5 lobes, again, appears to have been made at least partially on some kind of ancient lathe device. And these are very hard granite, syenite, and diorite bowls and other vessels that could only have been made, again, on a lathe of some kind. Now, the idea that the lathes were operated by foot or hand are quite ridiculous because in order to properly shape something like this, you have to have relatively high speed. So that means some kind of motor or engine would be involved. And those did not exist during the dynastic time period. And once again, many more of these objects. There are approximately 50 on display, but again, the cache that was found at Saqqara, the number of objects found was between 30,000 and 40,000. Many of them were found damaged or broken, and others unfinished. And here are some pottery vessels. These are from the dynastic time period. So it's very interesting that the ones that were turned on the lathe are even listed as being pre-dynastic, and yet these relatively crude pottery ones are from the later dynastic period. So what it's telling us, including this fascinating object here, is that the history of Egypt is far older and far more complex than most academics will state. And that's why these objects sitting in plain sight are fascinating and show us that it's very possible that there was a high-tech civilization existing 12,000 plus years ago in Egypt, and that these objects were inherited by the later dynastic people. What was this object? It looks like a flange of some kind. And note again that pieces are broken off. This damage appears to have happened in the very deep past because a high percentage of these objects are broken, and they were supposedly found in a massive pile all together in an underground space. These are boomerangs that are on display. Is it possible that the dynastic Egyptians invented the boomerang, or could these objects have in fact come from Australia, where the more famous history of boomerangs we know of? And then this very strange object. It's apparently made out of very hard granite once again, and the tool marks that we see where these circles are appear to be machine marks. What it's used, or what it was used during dynastic times for, I don't know, but again, it seems to be an object that was inherited by the dynastic Egyptians. Notice the strange burn marks on it. The burn marks could very well have come from a cataclysm that occurred globally about 12,000 years ago. It not only affected sites in Egypt, but we see ample evidence in Peru, Bolivia, and other locations that have megalithic structures. And why is it that all of the large granite boxes appear to have significant damage, especially in the corners? And now, this other object on the first floor has obvious tube drill holes. Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology. And now we're in what's called the Amarna section, which is where we find the collection of statues and other works of Akhenaten, who personally is my favorite of the pharaohs. Here he is portrayed as being androgynous, possibly. It is believed by some experts on Akhenaten that he physically did look different from the average human being, and he simply told his artisans, "Portray me as I am." That shows that he had a high level of personal confidence. And here we have a classic portrayal of the Aten sun god with Akhenaten with possibly an elongated head. And there's Nefertiti on the left. And here we have the famous busts of his daughters, including Meritaten, who obviously is shown with an elongated head. And here, another view. It's amazing that only about a year ago we were allowed to start taking photographs and filming inside this museum. Before that, it was illegal. But that's what's happening in Egypt. So please consider joining us in April 2019.